Thank you so much to Dan and John for that. I think we can all agree that was fascinating. Now, from smart cities to smart vehicles, it wasn't so long ago that the idea of self-driving cars was no more than science fiction. But we all know that's not the case anymore. If you think ahead to the year 2050 and ask, how will we move people and products then? The possibilities seem both endless and exciting. So we've asked the experts to look into the future of mobility. Let's welcome to the stage with Politico's Nancy Scola, the CEO of Byton, Daniel Kirchert, the co-founder and chief product officer of Aurora Innovation, Stirling Anderson, and the president of GE Ventures, Marianne.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nancy Scola, and I am a senior technology reporter at Politico, based in Washington, D.C. And I'm thrilled to be here at Collision today to discuss a great topic. In short, the future of cars. And in particular, the adoption of autonomous vehicles, car ownership, and the environmental impact of human mobility. And I'm especially happy to be here because a close family member of mine recently bought himself a very, very neat electric car with self-driving capabilities. And I'm trying to decide if I need one. And so I think that makes this session especially timely because people like me, a humble journalist, is having to address some of these questions and answer them for herself. Do I need an electric car? Do I need a car that drives itself? Do I even need a car at all? And we have a really terrific lineup of people here this morning to discuss this topic, who are really represent the cutting edge of this future of car discussion. So thank you everyone for being here. With that, let's get started. So Stirling, Aurora was founded in 2017 to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. What needs to happen before autonomous systems meaningfully change how we experience the car?
Sure. So there are a number of things that should happen to kind of support the introduction of the autonomous vehicle. Among them, the technology has to be developed. And this is a technology that's fairly complex, right? It's going to require several years and a lot of development from some very sort of talented people before we can kind of get this on the road. But besides the sort of development of the technology, there's also the development of vehicle platforms that are suited for it, which is to say the sort of interfaces, the electrical architecture facilitate it. There's also a set of sort of regulatory and sort of infrastructure that has to be put in place to support kind of the introduction of these vehicles that are driving themselves as opposed to having a human drive them.
And which of those components is Aurora most focused on?
Yeah, we're focused on the technology itself.
Okay.
So we've brought together a team of experts. We're just over 250 strong at this point. We've been at it for a couple of years. We have a set of partners and supporters across the sort of ecosystem, right? From several automakers with whom we're working to transportation networks. We're backed by companies like Amazon, like Sequoia, who are sort of excellent partners on the capital front. And that's kind of the focus that we have. We won't build a car. We won't build hardware because there are people who are better at those things. We believe that we move faster when we move together in partnership with several companies who play their respective positions. Automakers build the cars, transportation networks build the networks on which these are deployed. Suppliers build the hardware that we've designed, and ultimately we will have designed and built sort of the driver.
Okay. Daniel, Byton also launched in 2017 and is working to turn the car into what the company calls a next-generation smart device. Why is that Byton's ambition, and what will that mean for drivers?
Yeah, that's right. When we founded the company 3 years ago, we had really the vision to build a great electric car, but at the same time really let the car become a smart device. A bit similar to the telephone becoming a smartphone. We really believe in the age where the industry is merging, where the autonomous technology is coming, the sharing economy is coming, the first thing is that the car has to become a highly connected device. And we believe the user interface should change to let, in the future, the driver, the user in the car, better enjoy their time in the car. And that's why we changed radically the whole user interface with a very big screen, a coast-to-coast screen. We put a touchpad in the car, which allows the user to have a complete new way of interaction with the car. And the car has facial recognition. And in that way, we believe the car will become a digital living space. And it won't be so important anymore to look at horsepower, to look at the control driving of the car, but it will be much more important how you can spend your time in the car. And we can see right now, and in reality, a lot of people are putting out their smartphone in front of them and doing navigation, other kind of functions, because those basic functions are not delivered by the car. And of course, when we will see what Stirling is working on when that comes to maturity, it will be very meaningful for the user in the car to have a kind of environment to make better use of his time if he doesn't need to put his attention on driving.
And those advancements in the self-driving capacity of the car eliminate some of those distraction questions that I'm sure you get all the time. Drivers having sort of this amazing high-quality screen in their car that they might be paying attention to. How do you sort of address some of those risks?
Yeah, so actually the way how we design this user interface in a very intuitive way, so it will be even, we believe it will be even more safe in a normal driving scenario than a traditional car, because it is less distracting actually. And of course, I mean, putting a lot of moving content on the screen, this will only happen if we are in a safe situation where we can go to a level of autonomy. And a normal driving scenario using map or using other applications will also be safer in terms of the number of distractions than the normal car. And imagine we have this touchpad in the steering wheel, which actually allows your line of sight to be on the road. And it's a much more safe way interacting with the car than just having to take away your eyes and using a lot of buttons and using a lot of central controls.
Okay. And Marianne, referencing some of these electric advancements in electric capacity of cars or self-driving technologies, you've called this a transformative moment in the automotive industry. How's that going to impact individual drivers?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. The automotive industry is being fundamentally disrupted. And I like the analogy that Daniel made of, you know, the phone, your old-fashioned phone that maybe some people in this audience don't even remember, with the cord in the wall, and and moving to that smartphone. We're really changing the car and mobility in general from a mechanical system to a digital ecosystem. And what's really happening then is, as you've become tech-enabled with the car, you have the shift towards solid state with electric vehicles and batteries. You have the shift towards autonomy and high-end infotainment systems with smart driving. You also have the shift towards ride-sharing or car-sharing networks. So concurrently, you have the move towards really not so much car ownership, but I want a ride. I want to get somewhere, or I want some good delivered to me. We're having a shift towards how do I get that service or application delivered to me. I also have maybe an easier car experience with electric vehicles that are easier to maintain, autonomous systems that help you drive and help you manage that better, and then a richer, more entertaining experience in vehicle as well, so that you have, every sort of app and music that you want on demand available to you. You have kind of that video, you have your assistant tied in. So it's much more about the car and the mobility experience tied in seamlessly with your life versus, the historical car culture where you went to experience the car.
And when we discuss cars in this way as sort of smart devices or very interactive devices, it sounds a lot like some of the consumer technologies, as you mentioned, the phones that we have in our pockets, that sort of thing. When we think about the center of car innovation in the past, we used to think of places like Detroit. Now we think of places like Palo Alto, right, Stirling, where Aurora is based, that is sort of at the cutting edge of those consumer technologies. So is Palo Alto going to be the car center of the future? Is Pittsburgh, where I think Aurora also has some research facilities? What's going to replace Detroit as the car center of the future?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say Detroit is going to be replaced. I think the automobile is going to continue to be produced in many of the same geographies where it is today. The development of the self-driving technology specifically, if we were to highlight a couple of sort of geographic epicenters for where sort of talent has really concentrated in this space, it would be Silicon Valley, California, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Silicon Valley, for all the reasons the Silicon Valley has kind of attracted top-flight software engineering talent for many years. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, largely contributed to by the existence of Carnegie Mellon University and strong robotics programs through the years. So we tend to think of Aurora as having two headquarters, one in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, one in Palo Alto, California. And we believe that these will probably remain the epicenters for sort of robotics and self-driving technology for a while.
Yeah, I would just add on to that I think it's not about replacing, it's about adding new capabilities and talents. So you already talked about Detroit and Pittsburgh and Silicon Valley. Israel is now ascendant on the tech side of the automotive scene. When you look at the concentration of AI that they have now applied towards automotive. China is hugely ascendant on the automotive scene. So you see more centers coming up and collaboration across those different centers.
So Daniel, Byton is headquartered in Nanjing, China. Why choose to open there? And then a follow-up question, how is China thinking about these future of car questions?
Yeah, as you said, we are headquartered in China, but we are a global startup. So we have our engineering mainly centered in Santa Clara, also in the Silicon Valley, making a lot of use of technology, which basically you can only get there. And our design and the platform development actually is based in Munich. So we're trying to bring the best of both worlds together, the tech side as well as the best of traditional automotive. And if we wouldn't have chosen this kind of setup, I think we wouldn't have been able to do it in that point of time. And of course, China provides a very good base because it has become a national policy a couple of years ago to promote EV development, which has led a lot of startups to be there. And we got a very good environment, both from the capital market, also from the overall market and the consumer sentiment to do something like that. And what is very interesting in China is also that the idea of smart city is promoted very strongly. And I mean, if we think about the long term, I mean, bringing a fully autonomous shared economy to reality, it has to go together with urban planning and with governments creating the right environment to do that. And for that, I think China is a very interesting place, because in China, a lot of cities are still growing compared to maybe North America or Europe, where you have a very, very mature kind of environment, which is more difficult to change.
And Marianne, some of our, as Daniel referenced, some of our cities are very much designed around the sort of current conception of the car and how cars work, or older cities that have adapted to the car. What are our cities going to look like in the future when we move to fully electric, fully self-driving vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, we'll find out, right? But I think a number of things are important when you think about cities, and certainly North American cities have largely been designed around cars. So if you think about zoning laws, parking is critical. Where are you going to park the cars? If you have a retail center, an office center, where are the cars going to go? And those dynamics start to change if you have more autonomous vehicles that might taxi you in and out or away. As you shift to EVs, electric vehicle charging infrastructure will start to become and as you maybe shift towards fleets, taxi fleets that are driving you around, then I think you move towards centralized zones of charging and parking. And then you have more potentially dense kind of urban areas that don't have the burden of that parking and charging infrastructure. You also have the maybe luxury that people can move further away without having that be a heavy burden on their daily commute. If you think about a service, and certainly in Silicon Valley you have a lot of bus services already that are that somebody's driving you, that you have Wi-Fi, you maybe have coffee service. You can start to do that more globally for a broader population base, so you can start to actually have the resurgence of suburbs and exurbs, as well as people don't have to be as close to work. So you have sort of two different forces that allow kind of denser, on the one hand, that you don't need the infill for parking and infrastructure, but you can also allow people to go further away because the burden of traveling is not as high. From a retail perspective, you can see really the pop-up store on steroids, because now you can have a storefront that is traveling to you and moving on demand to you. So you can see a lot of things changing as we change our mobility infrastructure.
So self-driving food trucks, is that something that
you could see that, yes. You could see Amazon is sort of to the next stop, that you could have a retail experience at your doorstep.
Okay. Are there any cities that in your work you found that are sort of most ready to kind of embrace that future experience of the car?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Are there any cities that you've seen in your work that are sort of most ready to sort of embrace the future of a self-driving car?
Not in a meaningful way yet. I do think people are setting up pilots. I know Toronto is starting to set up the idea of the smart city in the future. I think we don't quite have that infrastructure yet. We do have, electric vehicles. We do have ride-sharing networks. We do have nascent autonomy, but we don't have those things coming together yet.
Stirling, when we talk about cleaner car technology, has electric completely won? Is the conversation over?
Sorry, can you say the question again?
When we talk about clean car technology, has electric EV completely won the conversation, completely won the debate about what the future of clean car technology is going to be?
In terms of powertrain technology? In terms of powertrain technology?
Yes.
Yeah, so electric vehicles, we're talking about sort of three different vectors of transportation right now, right? Electric vehicle electrification, self-driving, ride-sharing. Largely, these three kind of come together facilitated by ride-sharing pretty uniquely, for both electrification and also for self-driving. And the connection there is, for many years, the three impediments to one of us owning an electric vehicle tend to be cost, lack of access to sufficient charging infrastructure, and then range anxiety caused by sort of batteries of insufficient range for our personal driving use. When electric vehicles are introduced via ride-sharing, suddenly most of those things fall away. Costs are amortized over far more miles, and me as a personal consumer have access to these vehicles that I previously would not have been able to afford were I to purchase them. Charging infrastructure and range no longer matter as much to me, because that car, I know I have confidence that when it comes to pick me up, it's going to have enough range that's going to be able to get me to my destination sufficiently. Similarly, ride-sharing is an interesting introduction point for self-driving as well. Because in the early days, we're not going to be able to self-drive everywhere, on all roads, under all conditions. Instead, we have a set of roads, a set of conditions, a set of geographies in which we can operate. And the interesting thing about ride-sharing is when a request comes in for a ride, we know a priori its origin and its destination. We also know the conditions of the roadway. And so we can opportunistically dispatch either a human-driven vehicle or a self-driven vehicle for that particular ride. And as the capability of the system increases, gradually we're able to fulfill more and more of the rides in that network. And so if the question is sort of electric vehicles the future of sort of sustainable transportation, I do think it's a big part of it. I think it's facilitated by these other sort of complementary vectors of change that are coming to transportation. Yeah.
And Daniel, one of the challenges it seems like in China in sort of promoting the adoption of self-driving cars sort of long-term is that there's still social status accorded to owning a car.
Yes, too. Social?
Social status
yes.
accorded to owning a car in China. How do you address that question when we are sort of moving towards a future where maybe multiple families are sharing a self-driving car?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So actually China is changing very rapidly. I mean, I think 1 year in China sometimes feels like 5 years in the more mature markets, and this is really changing. I mean, like 10 years ago, there was a lot of this kind of conspicuous consumption where people buy high brands and cars for status. But if you look at the tier 1 cities right now, the young generation, the 90s digital generation coming up, a lot of them not necessarily want to buy a car anymore. Yeah? They want to use it. So I think this trend we will also see in China, but because China is very large and you also have a lot of tier 3, tier 4 cities, so both of these things will coexist. Yeah? But I think the sharing economy, as you can see from companies like Didi and so on, per day, I think 20 million rides, so it's progressing rapidly. Yeah? And I don't think we will see a ultimate sudden shift that people don't want to own a car anymore, but the share will definitely go up, and there's a lot of innovation happening in that place. It's not only about ride-hailing, there's new forms of ownership, and for example, we are also thinking about offering things like a subscription service or different forms of using a car, not owning it. And I think we will see a lot more things happening in that space and also move away gradually from the stigma of having to own a car for status.
And Stirling is, I'm sorry.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
One of the things that really excites me about these changes coming in transportation is for things like car ownership, there are millions of people in this world for whom that is not an option. In a society that increasingly requires personal mobility, if you want access to healthcare, you want access to employment, you have to be able to move around. Right, I recently read an article that kind of brought this to life for me about a young woman who's lived in New York City who for 16 years, since she was 11 years old, has used the city's sort of paratransit service. And to keep costs low and allow her and hundreds of thousands of other elderly and disabled like her who need to be able to sort of access the transportation they require, to keep those costs sufficiently low for that population, they have to share those rides. They have to go way out of their way to pick up a number of people, and her 8-mile commute to work takes 2 hours. Right, with constantly changing drivers who, frequently have difficulty finding where she is on the street, picking her up, and all of that. So I find one of the things that's most exciting to me is the accessibility that we can provide to those for whom personal car ownership is not currently an option, either economically or otherwise. They simply need better sort of transit service options than what we can provide them today. And this is one of the really exciting things about kind of these three changes coming to the industry.
In the short term, some of the cars, some of the electric self-driving cars that are on offer currently, I mentioned the car my brother recently purchased, they're not inexpensive. Is there any possibility in the short term that we're putting car ownership out of reach of some of the people who might not currently have access to it?
I think we're maybe combining different things. So if you think about, because in the future they do all, maybe converge into the same platform. But today, electric self-driving cars are a high-end vehicle, and they are in the main, and certainly marketed in North America, they're a high-end vehicle. But if you talk about ride-sharing, which I think is what Stirling was talking about, that's within reach of almost any user, although there may be options in public transit that may be more appropriate in some cases. But the overall shift from car ownership to ride sharing as a supplement, because I don't think car ownership is disappearing, you just start to complement it with ride ownership, is that you can move away from this big CapEx investment that buying a car, no matter how you buy it, requires upfront capital, which if you just need a ride somewhere, that's $10 versus say $500 at a minimum to buy a car, and then you got to insure it and put gas in it. So for $10 now you can get a ride. So it changes the barrier to entry to just get that mobility. So I think that's sort of one of the things that changes accessibility. For now, electric vehicles and autonomy are high-end systems, but over time they will come into common platforms that will be more accessible.
Okay, and final lightning round, I'm going to be a little self-centric here and talk about a recent American, a graduate of an American college, sort of 21, 22-year-old. In 5 years from now, is that sort of person going to buy a car, right? So what's making your predictions on car ownership? So if they graduate from college 5 years from now, do they want to buy a car? 20 years from now, do they want to buy a car?
I'm going to give you a deeply unsatisfying it depends.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is
Sure.
it the same person 5 years from now and 10 years from now?
Yes.
It's not a 21 and 22-year-old 5 years from now?
It's a 21-year-old 20 years from now. Yes.
So my it depends answer is going to be dependent entirely on where they live. Even today, were that 22-year-old to move to four of our 5 largest cities in the United States, LA, New York, Chicago, a couple of Washington, D.C., factoring in the total cost of ownership for them to own, operate, park, service their own car, already using ride-sharing services as they are today is economically beneficial to them. This will only improve with the introduction of self-driving, with the introduction of vehicle electrification. So I would say, as of today, that 22-year-old, were their sort of annual miles to be below something on the order of 2,500, I would suggest they forego car ownership altogether. That will improve, and as it does, more and more cities will sort of tip this way, where that sort of economic calculus will work out in their favor to forego car ownership.
Yeah, I'll give a similar but slightly different answer. The 21, 22-year-old 5 years from now in an urban center, totally agree with that. Urban center kind of unattached, let's say simple life, agree with that. That 21, 20, I'm going to answer a slightly different question. That 21, 22-year-old, when they turn 31, kind of thing, so a little later in life, as they have kids, as they have family, as they have more stuff to haul around, maybe there's just more baggage in their life, I think they're going to have a car. But they may not have as many cars as we have today.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I also believe we're gonna see a shift, but I don't think getting from A to B will become a complete commodity. I mean, there will still be a differentiation in the experience about using a car. For example, what can you do? How can you make use of your time? How comfortable is that? And can you be, for example, can you be in a digital living space? So I think that will still play a role, and there will be different levels of kind of experience in having a car as a service. And there might be people who just want to go out on the weekend on long term, not necessary to own the car, but they can use it. There will be new forms of making that possible.
Okay, excellent. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Quite clearly, we're at a fascinating moment in the evolution of the car. Thank you all for coming and sharing your expertise on that particular topic. Stirling, Marianne, Daniel, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.